Thanks everyone for joining us today for our generative design deep dive. My name is Holly Conrad Smith. I'm one of the customer success managers here at Giraffe. And I'm really excited to take you through some of the basics and then a little bit getting into the weeds in our flow builder in Giraffe. I have a background in computational design for previously when I worked for a real estate developer. So this kind of stuff is really near and dear to my heart, and I'm really excited to help you all get in there and start making your own generative design flows. If at any time during the webinar you have a question, feel free to drop that in the meeting chat and I will try to get to it as we go. And then at the end of the presentation, if we have enough time, I'm also able to open it up for live Q&A. So at that time, if you have a question, you can raise your hand and I can unmute you and we can talk through any questions you might have. And with all of that housekeeping out of the way, let's just dive right in here. So to start today, I just want to talk a little bit about what even is generative design in general. So you're probably used to seeing some things coming out of Giraffe. If you've used Giraffe yet, you're used to probably drawing, rectangles or polygons, applying a usage, and having, that those attributes and properties of the element that you drew sort of dictate the size and shape of that element. All of those attributes that are assigned to that what we call a feature in Giraffe, it's a GeoJSON feature, is really just determined by you clicking on the map and drawing and maybe copy pasting and moving those elements around manually. When we start talking about generative design, we're saying we're giving the computer a set of instructions to perform, and the computer is taking those instructions and making lots and lots of elements potentially all at once, or assigning lots of attributes all at once, or changing shape and color and things like that without you having to do all of the button clicks, which gets really useful as sites get larger or as you need to do lots and lots of scenarios very quickly. Having the computer do kind of the tedious part so that it frees up your brain to do the real thinking about, what kinds of mix and things that you want to see there. It's really helpful in those situations. To start a little bit, there's just a little bit of a glossary that will help you understand some of the things that we're talking about today. So first off, you might hear me say algorithm a few times. Algorithm just means a set of instructions. It's, if the area is larger than X, then turn the thing green. That is an algorithm. Those kinds of, step-by-step instructions help the computer understand what you're looking for, and you can use the Giraffe Flow Builder to build those. Speaking of Flow Builder, we call our generative design builder interface the Flow Builder in Giraffe. It's because it looks a lot like a flow chart, where you're connecting, various things together in sort of a tree with strings in between. And because it looks like a flow chart, we call it a flow. Another way to think about why we might call it a flow is because an algorithm is really an ordered set of instructions. So there's a flow to it. So you have a start and an end. And the start in Giraffe is typically a very simple geometry, maybe a plain rectangle, maybe a polygon, maybe even a point. And the ending geometry might be extremely complex depending on how many instructions you give to the algorithm in the flow. To break that down a little bit more, you might hear me say transform. And a transform is sort of a discrete small part of the instructions in the algorithm. So with my example that I said earlier, if the area is X, then turn the shape green. One transform in that flow might be just the if statement. Another transform might be measuring the area of the shape, and yet another transform might be assigning the color green. So it's all those little individual steps in the flow we call a transform. And then there's also connectors and wires. And transforms have both inputs and outputs, meaning the information comes in one side and the resulting information comes out the other side. All of those places where that information gets fed into the transform kind of visually on your screen, we call a connector. And then lastly, the way that you tell the computer what order to perform things in is by connecting the transforms in order using wires. All of this probably sounds a little bit, nebulous for now, but you'll see what I mean in just a moment when I start opening up the Flow Builder. Before I dive in, I see a question from Sean about the recording. And we actually upload all of our webinars to our YouTube channel. So this one will get uploaded there in the next couple of days. And if you're interested, you can also check out all of our other past webinars on our YouTube channel as well. So great question, Sean. Thanks for that. All right. Well, let's dive right in here and start looking at some flows and start seeing what the parts are that are in these. I'm actually going to turn off almost everything on my base map today because I just want to be looking at geometries. I'll flip this to top view. And if you've played around with the Giraffe toolbar at all yet, you might have noticed this lightning bolt here in the toolbar, and when you mouse over it, it says flows. So this is a really great place to start if you've never sort of explored generative design before, because Giraffe has put together some pre-made flows for you that you can already just use in your projects. One of those flows that I particularly like is this industrial flow that has a rear dock and employee parking on the front, and it places trees, and there's a lot of geometries happening here. But if you noticed, when I drew this, all I actually had to do was draw a plain rectangle. And then that plain rectangle has all of the transforms assigned to it. And that's how it gets all of this additional geometry, usages, information attached to that initial rectangle. So that's the whole idea of generative design. If I were to draw this from scratch, it wouldn't take me too long in Giraffe, but it wouldn't take me a second like this just did. So it's really freeing up your time and your brain power for doing other things. Some other flows that are very popular in our pre-mades are our apartment flow. This is using a super complex algorithm that's built to turn a line into a set of apartments, and you can set the mix and your preferences for those apartments in the properties palette. So I'm coming in here to apartments, and from here I can set things like how wide I want the corridor to be, how wide I want the units to be. Each side can be different. I can have it have a flat butt end, or I can have the units wrap the end of the corridor. And then here I can change my mix. So lots of user input that's available on this algorithm. But in the back end, it's again just a set of instructions that are being given to that initial line that I drew to turn it into these apartments. I'm seeing a specific question about the apartment algorithm. I'm going to talk more in general today about how to build flows. And if you have any specific questions about how to use a particular transform, we might be able to hit that at the end if we have time. Or you can always check out our knowledge base. We have a detailed documentation for every single transform in the flow builder. So that should give you all of the answers that you're looking for. All right. So with those couple of examples, you kind of get an idea of what you can do in the flow builder in general. So let's dive in and build one together. I'm going to build a really simple flow at first. And while I'm doing that, I'm also going to put up a poll for you all because I'd like to build a sort of complicated flow at the end of our presentation, but I'd like to get your feedback on which design you would like me to focus on. So I've put that poll up for you. You should see it on your screens. Definitely vote for whichever one you think sounds the most interesting, and then we'll come back to that at the end here. Perfect. So I'm going to, while that's up, I'm going to start designing my first flow from scratch. And what I want to do today is create a row of trees based on a line. So where I want to start with that is obviously just the line. That is the sort of feature that I want this to be based on. So I'm just going to drop that line down here on the map to start. And I did that really quickly using the L hotkey, L for line. But you can also draw a plain line just using basic shapes from the toolbar as well. Now to turn this line into a flow, I'm going to open the flow editor or the flow builder over here. So on your left-hand side, you've got layers, you've got properties, and then down here you have the flow editor. The flow editor opens up as this flyout, which is really nice because you can see your properties and your available flow information at the same time. And what you see when you first open it is a suggestion of some basic transforms that you can apply to whatever shape you have selected. You might see slightly different ones depending on what kind of shape you've drawn. For instance, apartment will only show up if you've drawn a line because it's only applicable to lines. Today, the transformation that I want to start with is array. And what's nice here is you can kind of see a preview of what the resulting geometry is going to look like, depending on which one you choose. And I want to place trees along this line sort of at even spacing. So array looks like it's going to get me there because I can see it's placing dots along the line sort of at even spacing, and I bet I can put a tree on each of those dots. So I'm going to start with that. When I click the initial transform, it's going to open up the flow builder, and this is sort of drilling into the engine of Giraffe, if you will. It's in many ways showing you what's going on the back end. So I have this feature. The feature was that initial line that I drew. And then this blue transform here is the array that I assigned. And you can tell that it's a transform because it's blue. And then the output is this green one here. You can see that the output also mirrors the output that is assigned in the properties palette. So if I were to click the output here, I'm seeing the same thing that would happen if I clicked this and opened up the output. So it's just displaying it in two different places. The reason for that being I could have the flow builder closed and edit things in the properties palette still if I wished. So I'm going to click on the array, to go into the settings for this one. So what I can do here is set my spacing between my dots. Maybe I want 50 feet between my trees. And then there's all kinds of things that I can drill into here if I want to. Really great to explore on your own time. One of the nice things about the Flow Builder is everything's pretty instantaneous as you're changing it. So just try something and see what it does. Have that, sort of curious mindset to see what you can come up with based on what you've done here. So I'm going to just close that out and then save my changes. And you'll see hopefully that the dots now are spaced a little bit further apart. And then the last thing I want to do is actually assign that tree usage to my outputs. So I'm going to click on the output, and then it's prompting me to select a usage. I'm going to assign the tree usage and click save. And now I've made a row of trees. And this row of trees is parametric, so as I make the line shorter or longer, it will add additional trees at that set spacing that I determined. And it will even work if I start making this kind of a weird shape. It will continue to generate trees along that line. I can always come in here after I've created the flow and edit the settings of my transform by just clicking on the output that I want to edit. So I'm going to click on tree here, and I don't actually want to edit the usage. I want to edit the array transform. So I'm going to click on that section, and you can see all of the settings that were available to me previously when I had the Flow Builder open, but I don't have to open the Flow Builder to do this. I can just adjust in here. So maybe I want to add some scale randomization. That one's always fun. Now, this is obviously a very simple flow, but you can get extremely complicated with these if you wish. So one thing you might want to do is have your row of trees actually be a double row of trees. So how would I do that? If I zoom in here, you can kind of see that I can do some different actions on these connectors between my nodes. And one of those actions looks kind of like a split. So when I click that split, it's going to add another transform down here below. And basically right now it's just duplicated that initial line. But what I want to do is add an offset. So I'm going to click in here. I'm going to select the offset line transform. I'm going to set how far I want it to be. And then I'm going to again put another row of trees on here. This row of trees, maybe I want to be, I want it to be the same as the other one and maybe have the same randomization. And then this, I am also going to put tree on. When I save that, I've now got my second row of trees. So I've still only drawn one single line, but it's drawing two rows of trees from that single line. And you can kind of imagine how this could exponentially get more complicated as you need. We do have a really good example flow in here that is like a road that has trees on either side and a cycle path next to it that works really nicely when you're moving it around. So you can build some really nice sort of streetscapes, especially with this kind of flow that I've put together here. One thing you might be noticing here though, is as I've added additional outputs from that initial line, I now have multiple outputs here underneath the generated features. So I have to click into each of these if I want to change the spacing of my trees. And you'll see that when I adjust the spacing here, it's only adjusting that particular output. This is a function of the legacy flow builder, where every single branch in the flow is sort of on its own. They're not talking to each other. You can't say, I want all of the arrays to be the same. As soon as you branch it, they're sort of individual, which can be really nice in some situations if you want to, have that granular control depending on what your end goal is. However, you also might have a situation where you want, both sides of your array to be identical, perhaps. And that is why we've recently updated the Flow Builder to be more in line with other parametric computational design tools, similar to like a Grasshopper or a Dynamo, where you have the opportunity to do looping functions or self-referencing functions that allow you to have sort of one input for multiple branch outputs of your flow. So I'd love to build the same flow using the Flow 2.0 for you, just to show you how that difference kind of works out. So I'm going to start again with just a line. And the cool thing about Flow 2.0, I think, is that it gets you even deeper into sort of what the Giraffe engine is really doing on the back end. So the legacy flow, the original flow builder, is very visual, sort of gives you an idea of what's happening. But the cool thing with Flow 2.0 is it's like really drilling into all of those individual commands that are happening on the back end. For instance, in the Giraffe engine, what's really happening is you're drawing a basic GeoJSON shape. GeoJSON is geolocated geometry. Basically, it's a coding language that Giraffe is built on. And all of those shapes, which are called features in GeoJSON, have attributes assigned to them. And then the Giraffe engine takes those attributes and turns that into the visuals that you're used to seeing. So, when you set the number of levels and the floor to floor height and the color and all of those things of your shapes, the Giraffe engine is taking that informational input and turning it into a visual output for you to see. So when we're using the Flow 2.0, we're thinking about it in a very similar way. You're taking that initial feature shape and then applying a bunch of information to it and then getting your resulting output at the end. So similar to your legacy flow builder, you do have some suggestions right off the start. There's not as many as legacy flow yet, but we are adding more and more every day. And very soon, I think you'll find that the Flow 2.0 is going to have a lot more options even than the legacy flow builder. But what I do see here is my points along line with set spacing. That is my array tool, just like from my other flow builder. So when I click on that, it immediately adds the this pre-made flow that accomplishes that array transform. So if you think about this broadly, it's still pretty similar to the legacy flow, right? You have your starting feature, which is this read feature node. You have the transformation, and then you have the output. It doesn't have a preview, but that is because the Flow Builder 2.0 is live updating on your map as you make changes. Whereas the Flow Legacy, you have to click save to see the updates happen on your map. In Flow 2.0, they're instant. So no need to take up space on your Flow canvas for previews. You can see everything on your map as you go. And then the only extra node that we're seeing here is because the array transform in Flow 2.0 is kind of special, where it has another input that allows you to edit those settings in your properties palette. So all of the legacy algorithms are in this dendrogram category, and they all have this additional node that allows you to edit the settings really easily in properties. So that's really nice. You'll see the difference here between this one versus this one, where your sort of settings are all very nested and you have to click in a lot to get to where you want to change things. In Flow 2.0, all of your settings are just displayed at sort of the root level, so really easy to see that there. So for instance, I can change this to 50 and I want my offset to be 0, and I'll put in a 25% randomization, but we haven't assigned a usage yet. So getting to some of the differences in Flow 2.0, it is both more powerful, but also a little bit more complex in how you have to sort of think things through. So one thing to note here is the array is outputting, if I mouse over this output where it says P and it has the brackets, it's telling me what the that the output of this is a list. And a list in code is just a group of items. It could be a group of numbers, it could be a group of text, or in this case, it's a group of points. So it really makes sense, like this line, if you're looking at it, has now multiple points along it. And we're looking at this array as the full group of those points. I want to assign the tree usage to these points, but I have to do one extra step in Flow 2.0 to be able to do that. The reason I have to do that extra step is because in computer code, when you're dealing with a list, you have to iterate through every item in that list to make changes to them. So think about it this way. Say we have a bunch of bananas, right? The bunch might have 8, 10 bananas in it. It's much easier to like pick up that bunch of bananas and handle it all as one group of bananas rather than trying to hold, 10 individual bananas in your hand. Might be really difficult. But say we want to paint all of those bananas blue for some reason. It would be very difficult to just dump blue paint on the whole bunch and have all of the sides and edges and everything be entirely blue to ensure that every banana got totally painted. So that's a similar thing or a way to visualize what's happening when we iterate through a list in code or in Flow 2.0. We want to take every individual item in that list, do a command to it, but then recompile it back into a list at the end because it's just easier to handle the group of items rather than every single individual item on its own. So if I want to assign a usage to each point in this array, what I want to do is add a data flow node. So I'm going to click on data flow here. And the one I want to use is map. Map is the most basic sort of looping function, if you will. The most basic, I'm going to assign something to every item in this list. You can learn more in detail about what every single transform does on our knowledge base. And we can, answer some more questions at the end if you have them. But basically what I'm going to do is say, okay, looking at this node, I'm going to feed in a list. And at the end, I'm going to get out a new list. And inside of that list, on every single list item, I'm going to give it some instructions. So first, let's put the array into that list. I'm doing that by just grabbing the connector and putting it into the next connector. And then the output, I want to be this write features node. So I'm going to take the result of the map and put it into write features. And then what I need to do is set up what I want to happen inside of this map. So we were saying we want to assign that usage. So I'm just going to double click on the canvas here and search through all of the nodes. If I knew what category it was in, I could also grab it from the category that is down here. So for instance, I want to apply a usage, and I could grab the actually I want this one, grab the usage names. But you can also search for those just by double clicking on the canvas here and searching for what you want. So maybe I didn't know what these nodes were called or what category they were in, but I know I want to do something with usages. So I'm just going to search usage and I'm going to see what my options are. Cool. So I'm going to look at this node and see what it's requesting. The first thing that it's requesting is a feature. So the feature is going to be each of those points. So that means that I want to take the list item and put it into the feature node here. And then the other thing it's requesting is a usage name. So I'm going to use the get usages to grab that usage name tree from my list and attach that to the usage. And now I need to take this result and put it into the result here. And you can see as soon as I did that, my map has updated and I now have a row of trees created from the Flow 2.0. So it's, maybe this section is maybe one more step than the Flow legacy, but you'll see soon that the advantage is that in Flow 2.0, I can take this same settings from my initial array, and if I had multiple outputs, like multiple lines, and I did an offset, I would be able to use that same spacing again. So let's do that. I'm going to take my read feature and I'm going to do offset line, and I'm going to do my offset line transform. So that's going to put in the settings here for the distance that I want it to offset. A cool thing in Flow 2.0 is to change the order of the user inputs. You just change the order on the map. So if I want my array transform inputs to be first, I just make sure those are on top. So you can see how those update as I go. And then I want this distance to be 50, just like the other one. And then I am going to take this offset line. I think I can only have a feature here. So I'm going to actually doubly make this a map. So now I'm going to feed that line in there. I'm going to feed that line in there. If you hold down Shift, you can feed the same information or two things into the same node. Then I'm going to do this, do this. Perfect. All right. So we have now created this offset from the initial line that I drew. But if I want to change the spacing of both sides of trees at the same time, super simple. I'm just going to type in that spacing and it's going to update both at the same time. Same thing with if I wanted to update the scaling, I just need to type that in there. So you can see where, maybe it takes a little bit more setup initially, but for the actual end user, for the person you're creating these flows for, it's going to be so much easier for them to update this information at the end, because it's very clear what they're doing. It's right in the root level of their properties palette. All of the settings are just exposed, and there's no like weird nesting or multiple branches or confusion about what I need to click on to edit what. It's all just exposed. And a nice thing with these flows is that they're also very easy to share. So we're finding that folks that are building Flow 2.0s a lot in their projects, their colleagues are taking advantage of them and dropping them into a new project, but they aren't ever even opening this part of the Flow Builder. They're just applying the flow to a new element by saying, okay, I'm going to draw a line, and I want, that points along line that Holly created, and just grabbing it, and it instantly gets assigned. And then they can come in here and adjust all of their settings as they will. So very cool stuff in that Flow 2.0. Awesome. So with that, I think it is time to take a look at what the results of the poll were, and let's build something a little bit more complicated together. So it looks like just barely for the win is the place multiple building types based on the site boundary. This is a really fun one, so I'm excited to show it to you. I'm gonna pull up my reference one over here on my other screen, just in case I forget exactly what I'm doing. But something I want to remind everyone is it's really difficult to break anything with your flows. More often than not, you'll see that something isn't working, but just keep trying new things and clicking on things. It's not dangerous to mess around with these, I guess is what I'm saying. So don't be afraid to, really drill in and give some testing to these things. Cool. So I am going to get started on my place multiple building types based on the site boundary. Awesome. So the first thing I need to do, obviously, if I'm doing this based on the site boundary, is to draw a site boundary. So I'm going to just pick this block. Looks good. Draw a site boundary. And I'm going to save this as a project just in case my internet has some issues today. So this is going to be Flow Builder Deep Dive. I'm going to turn off all caps because that was unnecessary. Yeah. See what I was saying about internet issues? I'll just refresh. Cool. All right, brand new flow here. I'm going to right click on this project boundary and just do create. That's going to initiate a feature that's exactly the size and shape of my site boundary. And I'm going to use that to create my flow on top of. So of course, open up the flow editor and go to Flow 2.0. And the one I want to start with is subdivide. Subdivide is going to take this sort of larger shape and turn it into more individual parcel sized partitions, subdivisions. Close urban metrics so that we can see this a little bit better. Just bring this over here. Perfect. So you can see as soon as I clicked on the subdivide, we've now got the shape subdivided into multiple parcels. That, sorry, just opening up my reference over here on my other screen. That's the first step. If we want to place multiple buildings on this site, the first thing you gotta do is turn it into more of like building size parcels. So definitely love using that subdivide to lots transform to accomplish that. This one is similar to the array transform that we saw previously, where it has the subdivide lots inputs that show up here in the properties palette. And from here, I can put in some assumptions maybe that match a little bit better to what I want to do on this site. Maybe I want some slightly larger parcels. Set some settings here. And I'm also going to set setbacks on these parcels. So, you know, maybe my front is 10, rear is 15, sides are 15. So that we can set up our spacing in between everything to be, you know, nice. And obviously you would do this based on your project's actual restrictions. But I'm just sort of putting in some random things to get a nice output for today. And what I want to do first actually is assign the parcel usage to the general shape here. And this is another thing that's nice in the Flow 2.0 is you can assign a usage to the initial feature and then use the flow to assign usages to the generated features later on, rather than having to assign all of the usages within the flow. So it gives you that little bit of additional flexibility, if you will. Okay. So the next transform we want to use here is called site fill. Site fill is another one that has, whoops, just deleted my whole shape, is another one that has some user inputs in the properties. So I'm going to search for that site fill transform. Just connect this here. And then if I scroll down, I can see my site fill information here. And this is where I'm going to set my target width of the building and my target open space for each of these parcels. So that's how it's going to solve this results from the site fill, by taking the target width that I want for the building and putting in some minimum open space as well. So site fill has two outputs. One is the spine of the buildings that it's creating. So it creates a center line for those buildings. And the second one is the open space, the leftover. So the easiest one to set up here is going to be my open space object. So I'm just going to map a usage to those. Usage. Maybe I want to make these just landscape. Sure, deep planting sounds beautiful. There we go. So we're seeing the open space that's going to be left over by these buildings once we create the buildings. But the next thing we want to do is actually turn the spines from site fill into buildings. So if I were to just write features from those spines, you'll see them get generated here. Those are the effective center lines of those buildings. But I want to turn those into actual, you know, building geometry. So I need to give them some thickness. So the one I'm going to use is offset polygon. Oops, I put the inputs down first. Offset polygon here. And here. And then I need to put in the actual sizes that I want these to be. It came in at the front. I'm going to make this, let's see. Oh. And I'm just visually checking what my results are to get what I am going for here. I might need to make this parcel a little bit larger actually. Site fill works the best when it's on a pretty big site. Let me do slightly less wide buildings here. I did this off the envelope. I might need to make my my setbacks a little bit larger too. Now, of course, this is sort of similar things that you would be doing as you're designing as well. You're sort of assessing what's going on the site and making adjustments as you go. And now what I need to do is assign usage to each of these building types. So I'm going to notice here that my output, of course, is multiple geometries. So if we remember, if we have multiple geometries, we have to use map for that. So I'm going to map my usage. And getting a little bit messy here with overlapping things, but I can always move stuff around quite easily. And I want my right features to come out of that. And I need to actually select a usage from the list. There we go. And I'm noticing here from my offset polygon that I forgot to set with holes. There we go. And I probably want this to be both. Great. So now I have, you know, some buildings. They're all very tall. I'd probably want to also write in the levels. So I'm going to write property levels, and I'm going to put in a number here for the number of levels I want this to be. I want it to actually be 5 maybe. And you can see from this example how I can chain together multiple commands in the same map. You don't have to separate out your map. It's just everything you want to do to each of those elements, you can do it inside of one. And now, if I go back to my subdivision settings, I can start playing around with maybe adjusting my spine location. I can make this a more interesting shape perhaps. And you'll see from that site fill algorithm that it's starting to generate, you know, sort of different sizes and shapes of buildings inside of the parcels that it's generating based on what parameters you put in for that building width and the amount of open space. So if I were to increase the amount of desired open space, my buildings are going to get smaller to adjust for that. So really dynamic now that I have this set up. I can, you know, put it on any site that I want. So maybe I see this site over here. I'm going to draw a polygon that sort of matches that site. And then assign the flow 2.0 to it. And I have my subdivide to lots. And this one generated a bunch of little L's based on its current sizes. Maybe I want these to be a little bit bigger. That's really ugly. But of course, I would go in and change my settings, but you get the idea there. So that is how I would place a bunch of buildings down on my site using site fill. In this example that I just showed you live, I did all of my buildings as the same usage, but I'm going to copy in another example that I have here and just show you, without building it live, what some options are. So this is the same kind of site fill algorithm, except here I am applying sort of a random mix of usages and levels to each building. If I open up my flow editor, we can see kind of how that works. It's a little bit complicated, but this is one of those things that if you get in there and play, you can figure out some really cool stuff. So what I've done is said, if the area of that building footprint is 2,000 square meters or above, then give it the usage residential, otherwise give it the usage commercial. And then I've also put in a random number for the number of levels for each parcel. So just some fun stuff there. And then as I adjust my spine, you'll see that the sort of building configuration and the mix and the levels and everything kind of dynamically updates based on that spine location. And I can even turn the spine around like this, get some crazy stuff. So lots of flexibility there, and really the sky is the limit. It's sort of what can you imagine and what are your end goals in writing those instructions in the algorithm. So that was what I had planned to demonstrate today. If anyone has any, sort of specific questions, I can hang out for the next 4 minutes and we can go through those. And if you think of anything along the line, if you have any additional questions later, you can always email me. My email is holly@giraffe.build, and I'd be happy to help you out with this stuff.